accordance with the letter. Sadly, many people, including confessing Christians, have lost the ability to discern, or even discuss, whether a particular idea or practice is warranted by Scripture, or to define what literal means. It was James Barr who first alerted me to the importance of being able to say what it means to be biblical, as well as to the challenge of defining what it means to be literal. Simply holding a high view of Scripture is no guarantee that one's interpretation will be sound. Nor does citing verses here and there make for a biblical theology. Heretics do this too. Barr castigated so-called fundamentalists for their supposed literal interpretations, showing in example after example how poor their readings actually were, at times not even getting the genre right. Is it I, Lord? How then can we get the Bible right? There are so many ways to read, so many schools of biblical interpretation, so many methods for Matthew, to cite one title in the Methods in Biblical Interpretation series. That there is a conflict of interpretations is well known. The more intense conflict, however, is between approaches to interpretation and competing visions of what biblical interpretation is for. The present book is about what it means to read the Bible theologically. In 2010, Miroslav Volf declared the renewed interest in theological interpretation of the Bible to be the most significant theological development in the last 2 decades, comparable to the rediscovery of the Trinitarian nature of God in the early 20th century. Most significant, perhaps, but surely one of the most controversial and misunderstood developments. I served as general editor of the award-winning Dictionary for Theological Interpretation of the Bible. Yet, despite its being a dictionary, a definition of theological interpretation of Scripture, henceforth TIS, proved elusive. In the introduction, I confidently said what theological interpretation is not, gestured toward what it is, for example, it pertains to God, yet concluded by acknowledging a smorgasbord of approaches operating under the general rubric. Minimally, we could say that TIS is interpretation that keeps theological concerns primary. Much to my chagrin, TIS fell less like a bombshell than a lead balloon into the playground of the exegetes. Historical and systematic theologians were generally enthused, but many, not all biblical scholars, came to regard theological interpretation with a hermeneutic of suspicion. What was new about TIS was worrisome. What was good about it was old news, something biblical scholars had already been doing. The following evaluation is representative. Theological interpretation of Scripture is partly disparate movement, partly a call to reformation in biblical interpretation, partly a disorganized array of methodological commitments in hermeneutics, partly a serious enterprise, and partly, I suspect, a fad. There is some truth to every part of this verdict. For example, many parties were scaling the mountain that is TIS by different routes. Having observed and tried several of these attempts, however, I have concluded there is a better way. Like the Sherpas who serve as both guides and bearers of camping equipment, ropes, food, and even oxygen canisters, I here plot a new course, although it remains to be seen whether I am climbing Sinai or Tabor, or both. In any case, it is a mountain with light on top. 20 years ago, I wrote another book about biblical interpretation. Its primary aim was to respond to the postmodern challenge that drained the Bible and preaching of authority by claiming that texts, including biblical texts, have no stable, authoritative, or objective meaning. My argument was theological, but pursued 2 related projects simultaneously, flip-flopping between general and special hermeneutics, so that it was not always clear on which track the engine was running. Was I arguing that all books should be read theologically, or only the Bible? Answer: I was arguing that all books should be read like the Bible.